The Quantrix 21.2 release is a big one, with 3 key areas of focus: cloud performance, new user proficiency, and data connectivity. Stick around for some details on what's new in 21.2. First off, our cloud development team has been super busy rebuilding the front end of our web software in a modern JavaScript framework called React, and we've shipped all of that shiny new code in the 21.2 release. On average, the new version of Cloud makes 50% fewer server calls, and for each may reduce the data exchanged by up to 80%. The most important thing you'll notice is the speed. Making selections is super fast. Editing data is much snappier, scrolling long tables is more dynamic, and working with large models should be faster overall. Even more than today's performance enhancements, the investment we've made in this new framework sets us up to deliver some great features in the future. When you open Quantrix Modeler 21.2, you'll notice some big changes in the launch panel. New users can take a ride on this tutorial rocket ship to get acquainted with Quantrix concepts. It's a high-level walkthrough of the basics in a step-by-step fashion. Next, you can work through each of these 6 new training models, covering several important content areas, including structure, logic, application design, and more. Each lesson is actually itself a Quantrix model, hosting interactive try-it-yourself activities that will help new users understand how to get the most out of Quantrix. Save your copy of the training model, and as you work through the lessons, you'll get badges along the way to mark your progress. When you're done, you should be ready to start building your own models. The new training is great, and beyond these basics, we can definitely recommend that you work with one of our premier partners, who you can find listed on our website under About Partners. Any of them can tailor a next-level live training session using your own data and models to better cement your new skills. Just ask, and we'll introduce you. Alright, there are a ton of great improvements for data import, so let's jump in and see a few in action. First off, we now support getting data into Quantrix directly from Google Sheets. When you launch this new data import option, you'll be prompted to log into Google using a browser window, and there you'll approve access to the areas and assets we need to model your Sheets data. Spoiler alert, there's a new option down here, Put Data Into an Existing Matrix. We'll look at that in just a few minutes. Once we click OK, the Google Sheets data will appear in your data import configuration pane as usual. Voila! While we're here, I'd like to show you another time-saving feature, the new Date Binner. If we drag a date field over to, say, the column tray, Quantrix will prompt you with what we're calling the standard date fields. Year and month are chosen by default, and you can also add a day field, choose your separator in these standard options, but my favorite feature is that you can create 2 or even 3 separate date categories in one go. Boom! Years and months. If you want more fine-grained control over formatting, access to time binning, etc., head on over to the Custom Date Fields option, which is a streamlined version of the date quantization dialog we had in prior releases. Now I'm going to start another import because there are a few new capabilities that are specific to database sources. I'll open up one I've saved previously, Superstore 21. Here at the top of the dialog, you'll see a new feature, Max Rows. If I check this box, I can define a limit for the number of rows this query will return. That can be useful if my data source is really big and I want to see some of the data while I'm setting up the import, but not necessarily all of it. Our query is going to be fast, but let's pick a low number like 50 to see what happens. On customer request, it's now possible to search the metadata of our database connection. That might help if you have hundreds of tables. So if we weren't sure in which table our sales data could be found, we can search for it. Ah, here it is. Next, let's look at the Put Data Into option I mentioned earlier. Using a data import to feed an existing matrix might be especially useful if you prefer prototyping your data structure ahead of time, or if you plan to use a template as a starting point for your model building. This model has 2 matrices. Let's pick the forecast one to illustrate how to use this capability. We'll come back to this Configure Import Dialog option in a few minutes. So here are the fields from our database. In this prototype forecast matrix, there are a couple of categories, regions and products, along with this formula that computes growth by region using the rates over here in this rates matrix. The purple cells are computed and the white cells are just dummy data I typed in. What we'd like to do is replace the dummy data with our actuals data from the database. This field, called subcategory, contains the data I want for my products in this forecast. So if I drag it on top of this products tile, Quantrix will replace the dummy product names with the actual names from the database. Similarly, we want to replace the dummy regions with the data from this field. We can do the same thing, but notice that region is a linked category, meaning that the values of the forecast matrix here are the same as the values in the rates matrix over here. Keep an eye on what happens up here when I drop the field. This is how Quantrix maintains the structure of your model, but lets you fill it out with data as you like. Okay, now I want to use only last year's data as the starting point for my forecast and ignore prior years in the database. So let's drag the order date field up here to set a filter. Now, I could use some of the built-in filters to set the date to before January 2022 and after December 2020, but there's a new way to take a shortcut here. I'm going to enable the new Sql mode and just use the year function to limit this query to only data from 2021. Sql mode controls the where clause of the query and can do some pretty sophisticated stuff, but it works just as well for simple tweaks like this. Finally, we can drag our sales and, let's say, profit data into our model. Quantrix will ask for some clarification. Do we already have a data category? In this case, we do. It's called metrics. That's where our existing sales item lives. The last question is, for whatever categories are left over, in this case only the year is left, into which item do you want to put the data? The first value is the default, which is what we want, 2021. So here's all the data. No, wait. Remember how we set max rows to just 50? That's probably why some of the cells are empty here. If we turn max rows off, we'll see the rest of the data and that there was actually another region in the database that wasn't represented in those first 50 rows. On a related note, we've had the live preview on this whole time. That allows us to see if we're getting the data we think we should be getting. Some customers have asked for the ability to start the data import with live preview off, and we've added that possibility to the data import options. But probably the reason people wanted to turn off preview was because their queries were extra big. I think the max rows feature solves that problem a bit more elegantly, but hey, now you can do either. The very last thing to point out about the new data import capabilities is this configure dialog. Remember how we had the option when we launched the data import to show a dialog? This is the one. Here, instead of using drag and drop, we could have taken a mapping-based approach in this menu. Picking our data category, mapping the items from fields, pointing out where the data should go. Even if you prefer drag and drop, you might want to use this dialog to make changes to any of your previous choices. Alright, so we've talked about cloud performance, new user training, and data import enhancements. There are just a few more new capabilities I'd like to walk through before we wrap up. First is a little keyboard shortcut you might find handy. You probably know that you can make comments in a formula or completely suppress a formula with a couple of forward slashes like this, and then take them back out again. Now, I'm going to put in a few extra formulas here to do some next-level advanced forecasting. I'm not quite done with this masterpiece, but I need to break for lunch, so I want to keep them around, but make them inactive for now. I can comment out a formula by selecting it and hitting Ctrl/. You can choose any number of formulas and comment and uncomment them with this new shortcut. Great! Now there's a lot of data in this forecast. Wouldn't it be awesome if each of our regional managers could just see their own data and set their own growth estimates without being overwhelmed by data from all of the other regions? 21.2 has you covered. Let me show you. At the moment, I'm logged in as the modeler role, and we see all the data. But let's switch over to the central role and see what happens. The model is much cleaner now, and we only see data from our own region. How did we do that? Well, notice we have a filter applied to the columns of this matrix, and here we're using an expression. The way it works is, for each row, if the expression evaluates to true, that row will be shown, otherwise it will be filtered out. The new feature here is a brand new environment variable in 21.2 called $rolename that works in expressions and formulas. Whenever you see that, just substitute the name of the current role. We just logged in as the central user, so in this expression, any rows where the value of the region item, otherwise known as @regions, is central, then the expression will be true. The other part of the OR statement is central equals modeler, which is false. So true or false together is true. So we see all the rows in the central region. When you deploy this in production, instead of using a quick and dirty filter like this, you'd probably instead want to have the filter refer to a whole table of values that map a set of users to a set of categories and items that you want them to see. We'll put a more fully developed example in the answers forum and send you a bulletin so you know when it's up there. One last thing before we go. Let's say your regional managers log into the cloud, enter their data, and then want to print out a copy of the forecast and rates for their local reference. You can now do this with a script button. Let's look at the script first. It's pretty self-explanatory. There's a function called export PDF and a method called onlyViews that lets you list specific assets you want included in the print, and finally the name of the local file to save it, and that's it. Here's that model on the cloud. Gee, I wonder what this button does. And here we have the final report suitable for framing. Whew, that was a lot of stuff. Thanks for sticking around to the end of our What's New in 21.2 video. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks a lot.